Thank you so much for talking with us
Mhm,
today.
mhm.
Um, I wonder if the best place to start is just by asking you what originally drew you to social work and the studies that you undertook.
Sure, it's a great question. What drew me to social work? I um, long ago, decades ago, I got my undergraduate degree in social welfare. So I think even as a very young college student, I knew I wanted to be in the helping profession in some way. And then, of course, life took me on a different path for years and years and years, again, decades and decades. I was always working, in some way with people. I worked in a high school for a long time. I worked with substance abuse for a bit. But when my last child went off to college and I was alone, I remember the moment my therapist said, "So what do you want to do now?" Because I was at a place of, I just don't know what I want to do. She said, "What do you want to do?" And I came back the next week and I said, "I'm going to get my MSW and I'm going to then, become a therapist." And it was we have these moments that stick in our mind. That's one of those moments for me. It was like, wow, it was there all along waiting.
Mm,
And it was that question at just the right time that was like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And
mm,
I was close to 50 at that point. So, it took me a long time to come around. I remember going back to school and being, the non-traditional student and trying to figure out how this world of academics worked all those decades later. But that's really, I knew I had come home. It really felt
mm.
like that to me. And then from there I got to indulge my nerdy side, my neuroscience geek, and do all of the things, because I had, I had no responsibilities. I was on my own, and so I could dive in
Mm.
any way I want. So that really, thank you for asking that question. That was a lovely trip down memory lane. And
Yeah.
and then I think probably part of what pushes me is that I am older, and I was older when I went back. And so then I wanted to really dive into specialized trainings and learning what I could. And
Mm.
I've always been someone who, wants to learn something and then figure out, well, what could I do with that? So
Mm.
that then took me on this journey to, translate Steve's work to clinical application.
And so you specialized in trauma, is that right?
Yeah, I did an MSW, and at the same time I was finishing my MSW, I was enrolled in Bessel's trauma certificate program. So I did both at the same time, which again was lovely and probably crazy as well. It meant traveling to Boston one day a week and doing a lot of extra work, and yet it was just what I wanted to be doing. And I think it really, was a great foundation for how I was going to be a social worker. Social workers are systems thinkers. We're always thinking about, our client embedded in systems. And I think of the trauma lens that the certificate program gave me was so important. And,
Mm.
I did sensory motor just after getting my MSW, and then wandered from there to internal family systems. So, it's all sort of goes together. You could feel
Yeah.
how it goes together. And yet I think the trauma center program really was where I found my feet. It's like everything is through the lens of
Mhm.
trauma. So yeah, yeah.
I'd love to come back to a question about polyvagal theory and IFS, internal family systems, and your view on the two of them and how they, how they might work together. But I would just, I guess I was wondering what you feel trauma is and what it means for individuals and collectively.
Yeah, and it is a both and now, isn't it? We really feel the individual. We really are witnessing the collective trauma in our world as well. Again, I do look at everything through the lens of the nervous system now. So for me, it is a fairly um, simple way of looking at trauma. Trauma is a dysregulated nervous system right? A person whose nervous system dysregulates and can't find the way back to regulation, then that's how, that's trauma, right? It's and I think that's a good way for me to look at it, right? It's that dysregulated nervous system that is traumatic, both for the person whose nervous system it is, but also for the people around that person, right? Because it's sending those cues to other nervous systems about that I was just talking to somebody earlier, and we were talking about someone in our world who is sort of dysregulated and unpredictable and scattered, and we can look at it through the lens of the nervous system, and I can understand it, and my nervous system sends me a clear message when I'm around this person: I don't feel particularly safe. So then it becomes traumatic for me as well. And I think that's what we're seeing. And if we think about collective trauma, we have, groups of nervous systems. We know nervous systems are all connected with each other, right? We're inextricably intertwined, nervous system to nervous system. So as the dysregulated nervous system contacts others and dysregulates others, that grows, right? So we have these large masses of dysregulated nervous systems that are then we all are trying to find our way in that experience. The other is true as well. When we get regulated nervous systems together, then that grows and sends that energy out, and that, I think, is the path to healing.
And you became involved with the polyvagal theory with Stephen Porges's work. Could you say a little more about how that happened, and
Sure. Yeah.
a little about
So
polyvagal theory?
I read Steve's book, The Polyvagal Theory, and fell in love with it, which is not the usual experience when people read that particular book of Steve's. It's dense, it's deep, and yet for me, it was as if a missing piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Here was this brilliant nervous system. I had been very brain focused, which I think many, many therapists were, probably still are. I had even, been able to spend a few sessions in a histology lab, holding human brains and seeing brains being sectioned, which was for me just an awe-inspiring experience. So I knew about the brain, and I thought it was very important for clients to understand the brain. But when I read that book, it was like, oh, but there's this other piece, this other system that is in constant communication, and I need to know about it. And so I read Steve's book, and then reached out to Steve, and he's such a kind, generous, friendly, humble human being. He answered my email, right? This random social worker from Maine who said, I'm loving your work. I'm playing around with it. I wonder if you would come to Maine and give a workshop to my colleagues. And he said, of course. And that's sort of where it all began, because we were able to spend a number of days together, sort of, in that back and forth conversation, creativity, and sort of feeding off each other's questions and answers. And he really, at that point, was a wonderful mentor, and encouraged me to keep going with the work I was doing. I was working at that point I had created the autonomic ladder, which is sort of the signature of the way that I work. And he was very encouraging. It was like, oh, that just felt, oh, okay, I'm on the right track here. This will work. And I think my colleagues were delighted, because they were my guinea pigs. And so I would come into the office every week. Can you try this? Can you try this? And they were wonderful, and they would try everything and give me great feedback. But I think they were like, again, so it was great when I finally landed on something that I thought would work. And of course, it's always evolving now. But I kind of I joke and I say that my nervous system felt very connected with Steve's nervous system. And it was that back and forth flow, I think, that was like, oh, this is something I'd like to deepen. I'd like to continue. This is important.
So how long ago was that?
That was not that long ago. It was, Steve would know and I keep forgetting, but it was 2000, I don't know, 13, 14, somewhere around there, not that long ago.
Mm.
In the timeline of our lives, it's a fairly recent event, and yet again, I would say that is one of those moments that was life changing for me. Reading Steve's book, but then meeting him, and then really, having his support was life changing for me. I can remember going to the trauma conference probably the next year, and Steve was there, and he said, "Oh, come sit over here with me," and he would introduce me to everybody. Do you know Deb? And I'm thinking, why would anybody know Deb? And yet he was just very, come meet Deb. And so he was, and I think we all need those people in our lives, the people that sort of, you know, open doors isn't quite the right way, but that sort of, they're willing to accompany you and help you on the journey. And Steve was definitely that person for me. And without him, and I tell him this often, without him, I don't know where I would be, but I would never have imagined I'd be where I am today.
And so your latest book is called Anchored: Befriending the Nervous System, which is just a wonderful title. What do you think of as befriending the nervous system? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, and I love befriending. I think it's a lovely term, right? It's a lovely word. And when we befriend, we get to know, and then we continue to create a relationship with, we attend to that friendship. I think is what I think about. If I make a friend in the world, I don't just, see this person once and they're a friend. We become friends after spending time and getting to know each other. And I think befriending the nervous system is getting to know, first of all, how the biology works, but then how your particular nervous system has been shaped by your life experience. And then being able to turn toward your nervous system when it's bringing you those cues of safety, regulation, connection, but also when it's bringing you important survival information. Rather than turning away or trying to discount or trying to deny what's happening. When we befriend, we turn toward and we listen, and then we can use that information, because I think our nervous system has incredible wisdom. And when we learn to befriend, we have access to that wisdom.
So how can we all learn to befriend even more? I mean, it's something that so few people sadly are even aware of.
It is something that not a lot of people are aware of, and I think it's always where I start. I always start with making a map, right? Because I think that's the first and best way to begin to befriend, is to make a map of your nervous system, to get to know how those three states that Steve outlined so beautifully, ventral, sympathetic, dorsal, come to life for you. Right? What happens in each of those states for you? What are the stories, the beliefs? Because each of those states, has a different story about who we are in the world and how the world works. And so that's where I always begin. I begin with a map, and I think we humans love maps anyway. Maps help us know where we are and help us figure out where we can go and how to get there. So for me, a map is the beginning befriending experience.
And I'd be curious to know how befriending your own nervous system has impacted just your close personal relationships, or either for better or for worse, presumably.
It is such an ongoing experience, isn't it, to keep befriending, right? To keep turning toward, and we all have our patterns of protection built in, right? And I'm 69 now. I have 69 years of patterns being ingrained in my system, and it's easy to just fall into those patterns and not recognize we're in that pattern, and just live through the story that particular pattern of protection brings to life. So a couple things are important for me. One, my husband, Bob, needs a certain level of care because he had a stroke a number of years ago and is compromised from that, and more recently really struggles to he has type 2 diabetes, and just getting his sugars under control has been a real challenge. So part of befriending my nervous system is learning how I can both take care of myself and be there so that I can be a kind and caring caregiver, right? Because I can care for him, but to care for him in that place of ventral kindness is different. And I
Yeah.
think there's so many people who are caregivers nowadays. Anybody who listens to this knows that experience, right? We can show up and do what needs to be done, but to do it from a place of really feeling kind and compassionate and fully here is a very different story, and is very difficult and challenging to do. And none of us do it perfectly, I will say. So, I have to try and give myself a break. Some days are messy. They just are messy, and I can't find my anchor in ventral. And I can do what needs to be done, but it's not pretty. Right. So that's one, way that I continue to be impacted by this ongoing befriending. And, it's humbling to say, but this past winter I had a medical event, which I had two things going on. I had a bloodborne infection, which, is just happened for whatever reason. But I also had an event that's called Takotsubo myocardopathy, which is also called broken heart syndrome, and often happens after an intense event, right? And which was not my case. My case, and this is so humbling to say because I teach listening to your nervous system, right? But for me, it was years of not listening, right? And we know clearly that when we don't listen, our body is going to take more and more extreme actions to have that happen, right? So that you will listen. And my body reached the point where it said, you are done, right? Absolutely done. Stop everything. Because my brain, again, this is the brain body piece, my brain had a very certain way of a story about what it means to be a caregiver, what it means to be a caring person in the world. And my nervous system said, this is unsustainable, right? But it couldn't get my attention because I wasn't listening. And so it just stopped everything. And I was, for, a couple of weeks in the hospital, and then 6 weeks on, IV infusions, and a huge interruption, thank goodness, because it needs to be that big of an interruption to get my attention, apparently. So now I'm really trying to pay attention, to listen to the ways my nervous system is talking to me every day, and to practice more intensely, a deeper practice of that turning toward and listening. So, that's my self-disclosure. Even those of us who teach this and help others do this do not always do it so well for ourselves.
Yeah, I'm just really feeling as you're speaking what a fine art it is, because I can really, I can really relate in various ways as a parent. I mean, it's similar, and it's really difficult to be in ventral parenting, in that kind of hustle bustle of everything else that's happening in life. And it's really difficult to listen to one's nervous system and then honor what it's saying, isn't it? I mean, I really thought what you were saying about your ideas were different from what your nervous system was saying.
Yeah. And it's the listen, and then what do I do with the listening? So I gather the information, but then what do I do with the information that I've gathered? And that's the honoring the wisdom and taking the steps that are sometimes very difficult to take. Right. And then how do I make this change in a way that feels safe and okay to everybody? Right. So yeah, it's that gather the information, and then what? It's really, so yeah.
And how do you feel that, kind of as educators, as parents, we can help children be able to listen to their own, be able to befriend their nervous systems from a younger age?
Yeah, I would love this to be a common family language, understanding the nervous system. I think, when we work with kids, we really are working with the family system and the social systems that they are embedded in. And so as a social worker, when I had a child client, I really had lots of clients, right? Because that's the only way to work with, a child. So I think, we start with helping parents, educators, everybody who's involved with kids understand their own nervous system, because we are the regulating anchor for children, right? So we have to start with us, and then we invite the kids to create their own maps, and it becomes
Mm.
a shared language, right? One of the most fun things when I was seeing families was everybody would do a map, and they would put their maps on the fridge, and parents would come in and say, I wish we hadn't done that map, because, my daughter went to the fridge and said, Mom, I don't think you're anchored in your safe place right now. I was like, yes, because their system is getting the message, you are not regulated. So
Yeah.
it brings a level of responsibility
Yeah.
in for all of us, but it can also be fun, and I think we need to bring some playfulness in with it too. But I do think that it's incumbent on we adults to befriend and understand our systems, and then teach our children how to do that. Because if you learn as a child, it's so much easier than if you learn as a adult,
Yeah.
right? Right.
Yeah.
You can create patterns differently.
It just
Right.
feels like there's some ways that schools, families, but also schools could be weaving it in.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that work going on. We have lots of
uh,
colleagues who are beginning to, do school programs and pilot
mm,
studies in schools and write books about, academics. So the word is getting out there. I think the difficulty, as it is, even with my own system implementing with my personal system, can you
mm,
imagine what it's like to implement with a big system, right? We've got, hundreds of nervous systems that all have a different response to what's happening. So yeah, it can happen, and it takes patience and persistence, and it takes some people who are willing to be the trailblazers.
yeah. And how would you like to see an understanding of the nervous system inform therapeutic practices?
Well, I would like to see every therapist everywhere trained in, at least an autonomic nervous system lens, whatever we think that is, because no matter what kind of therapy you're practicing, you are working with your client's nervous system, and your nervous system is always sending messages. So if we don't understand that, we are missing a basic principle of human connection. And therapy is all about human connection. So I just think everyone should understand how their nervous system, they moves through states, how it sends messages through neuroception, and how to come into co-regulation, not brain to brain, but nervous system to nervous system. So I would love to see it out there in training programs, in schools. I
Mm,
think it's missing, most everywhere it's missing, right?
yeah.
There are very few programs that actually, teach this in their programs, which is wonderful. But um, because the message I get, and I'm teaching mostly therapists who've been out in the world for a while, but the message I get over and over is, why didn't I learn this in school, right? If I only had known this then, and then they fill in the blank, right? And say, yes, I understand that. So let's, as we're
Mm,
mentoring students, let's bring this in.
yeah. Yeah. And do you feel that there are particular things that um, therapists working with trauma patients should be focusing on? What do you feel the priorities are, say, for someone beginning to work with someone with a trauma history?
And I think I still subscribe to the, phase-oriented trauma model, and phase one safety and stabilization is, I think, where we start. And through the lens of the nervous system, it's having enough access to ventral regulation so that it becomes safe enough to reflect on the trauma stories, to not get hijacked by them, but to be able to, look at them, revisit them safely. And we can't do that unless we have enough ventral anchoring in our system. And
Mm,
so, for me, when I work with young therapists or with trauma therapists, I just keep, driving that home, that this is about a nervous system having enough ways to anchor in ventral and return to ventral on its own, and with you as the co-regulating therapist, to then make it safe enough to do the trauma processing that many clients want to do. I will say that as we use some of these basic principles of nervous system to nervous system connection, trauma can resolve on its own without us ever hearing the story, or without us having to specifically go there, because often the missing experience is of being connected with, accompanied, when you are revisiting a story, when you are going on a journey. And clients will often have this moment of something changes inside, something reorganizes, and when we go back to reflect on it, it's, oh, I wasn't alone. Right? So even in the safety and stabilization work that we do, it certainly can bring some of that process, resolve some of the trauma without actually going to it. And once we have enough safety and stabilization, regulation, ability to anchor in ventral, I found many of my clients would say, I think I'm good. I think I would like to go live my life from this new place, and I don't need to go back and do any of that other, trauma processing. I say, okay, because many clients reach that place and go, I'm good. We therapists want them to go on, but often it's like, that's great. And then some clients would say, oh, now I'm ready. Now it feels safe enough to, open some of those doors and look at that.
We were speaking to Leisha Sky earlier about music and the power of art and music, and I was thinking about older traditions and how people really had ways of being able to process without explicitly processing anything. What are from your perspective, what is it that's happening, for example, when there's a group of people singing together?
What a lovely experience that is, a shared nervous system experience, right? An experience of being joined in community, nervous system to nervous system, with a neuroception of safety, and if nothing else happens, that is a powerful experience, powerful to be feeling regulated and held within a group of other regulated nervous systems is quite an amazing experience, and incredibly healing in and of itself, right? So singing, shared movement, even shared storytelling, when we're feeling anchored in regulation, and we have that reciprocal energy going back and forth, that's healing. That is healing.
Yeah, shared feels like the important word.
Yeah.
And you wrote a series of lectures, Rhythm and Regulation. Is that right?
I have a bunch of different training programs, and the Rhythm of Regulation Foundations of Polyvagal Practice is the longest. And so, yes, that was a big undertaking, because it's a hybrid course, because everything in the world is hybrid now, right? It used to be a fully in-person, and so we had to go hybrid. So I recorded, I think it's 17 hours of teaching, which was really a wonderful experience, because you have to get very clear. And, when you're in person, you can sort of wander and go here and there, but when you're recording, got to be very clear. So it was a good process. And that's probably, the most deeply immersive program, and the one that I really love for clinicians. Anchored was written for sort of everyday people as well as clinicians. I'm finding a real joy in connecting with what I call curious human beings, rather than just clinicians. And I'm doing some work to bring that alive, because I really do think, as we were talking, every human being needs to understand how their nervous system works, and when they do, they're going to begin to move through the world differently. And as we move through the world differently, the world changes.
One of your ideas, phrases that I love is I think it's savoring is a way to shape. Isn't that right? Savoring is a means of shaping.
Yes, and
And I
savoring is this beautiful short practice. What I'm usually looking for, because when you know, in my work with trauma survivors, you know, people whose systems are very sensitive, and even coming to connection felt dangerous, you needed very small, simple practices that they could do and feel successful with. We all need to feel successful. And so I try to create a lot of practices that are easy to reach for and easy to weave into the flow of a day. And savoring is one of those. And there's a lot of research on savoring and how it really does begin to accumulate and shape your mind body system in a new way. But savoring is at most a 30-second practice. You know, and for many people, it's really a 15 or 20-second practice, because that's as far as their nervous system says that's enough, right? But to take a micro moment of safety and connection, a micro moment of ventral, and then just hold it in your awareness for up to 30 seconds. That's all you do is savoring. And then if you're with somebody else and you can share your savoring, say, well, here's what I just savored, that brings it alive in another way, and the other person gets to venture there with you as well. So there's that piece as well. But that's the simple savoring practice. And you know, if you really set an intention to savor once a day, you can really know you are shaping your nervous system towards safety and connection. And I think that's amazing. 30 seconds. I can do 30 seconds. I probably can't sit and meditate for an hour. I know I can't. I can't do it anyway, but I don't have an hour to spend on a great big long practice. But 30 seconds, absolutely, I can do that. And that's what my clients would tell me. I could, that's really, it's all you want, Deb, is 30 seconds. That's it. That's it. Can you do that? Yep. Beautiful.
it brings me to the question about IFS, because it makes me think of, you know, people connecting to their younger parts and then spending, maybe it would just be 30 seconds, holding that more fragile younger part and feeling that savoring that sense of connection.
Yeah, it's a lovely way to think about it. Yes, because when you're anchored in ventral, you are in, you know, whatever, you know, a number of different parts, or why self, or whatever we would like to call it. And if you, you know, even, you know, you can hold, or you can even, you know, invite a younger part to be in eye contact, or to just feel the energy of ventral that is circulating in your system, and do that for just, because the young parts, you know, it can be very activating for a young part. So 20 to 30 seconds is great. And then just let that part know, and this is available to you now, right? The young part took on the burden and took on the survival response, because that level of ventral regulation was not available back then. It is now. So introducing parts to that in a gentle way is so important.
I mean, I don't think I've ever heard anyone speak about parts work in that way. So it's so amazing and exciting.
I love IFS. I'm trained in IFS, and actually was trained in IFS before I discovered polyvagal. So, you know, it's been in there in my background, and I get asked all the time, you know, how I would integrate the two. And I think it's an easy integration. There are some people in the world who are bringing this to life beautifully, really integrating IFS and polyvagal, and I think we will see more and more of that as the next years unfold. For me, parts inhabit my states. And so if I am anchored in ventral, I have lots of parts that live there in ventral. I have self, I have managers that help me move through the day. You know, I lots of parts here. And I can also visit, safely connect with firefighters and exiles that live in sympathetic and dorsal. So, you know, that's the, you know, how do you feel toward the part? You know, Are you anchored in self, in the IFS world, or in my world?
Mm.
Are you anchored in a ventral state so that that energy can hold you in the work? And then when I'm pulled into a survival state, either sympathetic or dorsal, for me, the survival state activates first, and then it opens the door for all of the parts that live in those survival states to come out and take over. So that's my way of looking at it.
And you've just, I mean, you've made such a contribution to the trauma field in these last decades. Where do you see the cutting edge of trauma treatment being in the years to come?
So I have to first say that when you say that, it like it doesn't land in my system. It's so interesting to hear that, and I know that I have offered something to the trauma world, and I love that thank you for saying that. It feels like, oh, I'm just doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So it's an interesting, I just had to stop there for a minute. Oh, okay, wait a minute. So where is the trauma world going? I think the trauma field is certainly going to be paying attention to both body and brain. I think we started with brain, right? And we're in this top down place, CBT and all of that. And then we went the other way to body, where it was all body. I think it's body mind system, because we're a system, right? You can't separate them in that way. We have to figure out how they work together. So bottom up and top down have to work together in the work we're doing. And I think that's hopefully where we're heading. I think we're going to understand the biology. Certainly we're learning more and more about the particular biology of certain dysregulations. And I think if we can stop sort of pathologizing, which a polyvagal lens depathologizes. It's just your biology. It's your nervous system enacting a survival response, and we can begin to shape it differently. Then I think we can all come to this place of looking at each other as regulated or dysregulated beings in the moment, rather than making a moral meaning about behavior. That's where I hope we are heading.
And do you have a particular area that you're really hoping to be able to get stuck into? I mean, even more than you already have. Is there something that's sort of drawing your interest?
It's an interesting time in my life. I am in a place of looking at all of that. I'm not sure. I have so many thoughts around that, and I'm not sure yet where I want to head. I do know that I would like to reach a more general audience. I also would like to go deeper with clinicians who have taken my basic training, so advanced clinical practice. So those are like divergent, right? Advanced clinical for clinicians and everyday people understanding the language. So I have both of those going on, and I really hope that the world is going to come to a place where we can really meet in community, because community is so a part of a polyvagal lens, being together with other nervous systems. So my hope is that I can gather groups of clinicians to really understand advanced clinical practice in this way, and gather groups of human beings to come together in community and begin to speak this language and see how does this change our lived experience.
How would you love to see that unfold in terms of with people who aren't clinicians? I mean, what's your kind of fantasy about?
But my fantasy is to have immersive retreats, because I think we really learn when we're in this way of being, not just for 2 hours here and there, but come together and spend a week together, or spend 5 days together, and really feel what it's like to be immersed in this way of speaking and thinking and connecting. Because then I think the nervous system really has enough of an experience that it will begin to shape differently, and then we will take that back out into the world and spread that to other to the people around us, the people we live with and love and work with. So I would like to see that. And I have some plans to, just percolating to, run some retreats and kind of try this on for size and see what happens, see how it begins to take root and grow and change the world.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to hearing about that. Yeah. And then lastly, what do you think of Benjamin Fry's book, The Invisible Lion? And how did you come to know Benjamin?
Yeah, it was interesting. I've known Benjamin now for a while, and we came together. I'm not even sure how we came together. It was probably through Steve somewhere. But for those of us who know Benjamin, he is such a wonderful um, creative thinker, and has these wonderful ideas, and is always wanting to explore something, which is it was so inviting to me. And to see, for me, Benjamin's real gift, I think, is not only in creating kind of clinics and creating this way of working, which has grown out of his own lived experience, which I think is true for so many of us in the helping profession. Our lived experience has taken us on a journey, and we're in that place of wanting to use what we've gone through and what we've learned to support others and help others. So there's that piece that he writes about so beautifully. And then the other piece that I just love is his way of bringing technology to life, right? Because I do think that this is one of the ways that both clinicians and curious humans are interested in seeing out here in some way what's going on in here, right? It's sort of a validation of, oh, I was feeling this, but now I can see it as well. I think I think as humans we like that. We like that evidence. We want to see what we feel, and then we can begin to put it together in a different way. So I think his what he's offered, what he's created for the mental health community is quite amazing. And then I think what he's creating for clinicians, in the ways of working and technology is really something that is going to, again, change the way we think about therapy.
Great. Well, I mean, it's been such a pleasure. I feel like I could sit here all day speaking to you. It's just fascinating. And thank you so much.
It's been lovely to thank you for taking me down all those pathways that I hadn't visited in a long time. So I appreciate that. Thank you.